Hey, what's good, Bill, for this family? It's your man, Reggie Myers. You don't see my lady Tanya with me today. She's taking care of some other family business, but she is still with us in heart. This is episode 4 of Built for This. In episode 3, Tanya talked about her perspective on being a young wife, a mother, and her career. And likewise, I'm going to share just a little bit of my perspective. Getting married at 21, I knew it was something that I wanted to do. Wasn't really sure if it was something that I was ready for, but I hate to lose. And so once I set my mind to something, I'm going to try to see it out to the end. And so being a young husband, there were a lot of factors and forces pulling at me, from making sure that I'm providing for my family and my wife the way that I wanted her to be provided for, as well as the way that I felt like she needed to be provided for. So I was a hard worker. I worked hard. I made sure that the finances were straight. And I made sure that, she had the things that she not only needed, but that she wanted as well. And, one of the biggest things is that we had to learn how to communicate the same way. Like I've said before, she came from a different upbringing. I came from a different upbringing. And so our communication style wasn't always on the same page. But through the process, we learned how to respect and love one another. Being a young man, there were certain things that I had ambitions about. There were certain things that culture told me a husband was supposed to do. And let me just stop right there and say this. Culture isn't always the right thing when it comes to building a life together with someone else, especially when you're looking to build a union and a godly marriage. You have to go against what culture says a lot of times, and you have to be able to be willing to submit not only to your significant other, but to the will of God. And that's really how we've made it to 34 years. I was a police officer for 10 years, and then I got into real estate. Then I started doing mortgages. And early in our marriage, probably like 2 or 3 weeks after we got married, I got laid off from my job. And so nobody tells you when you say for better or for worse, for richer or for poor, that the worst might show up early in the marriage or the poor might show up early in the marriage. But one thing I recommend and I encourage anyone, whether you're getting married young, whether you're getting married more seasoned in life, you have to already have a made up mind that this is a commitment that you made, not just before a congregation of people, but most importantly before God. And so once you have a made up mind, there's nothing that can deter you from sticking to what it is that you said you were going to do. Tanya and I were married for 3 years prior to us having our first child. We had our first child at 24. And I tell people all the time, I made a lot of mistakes as a young dad. I raised my son the way that I was raised and grew up. And that wasn't necessarily always a good thing. You have to learn how to deal with your children, especially if children are involved, according to how God created them. And so God didn't make a carbon copy of my son or of any of my children. He made them as individuals. And it was a process of learning how to help them become the young men and women that God had created them to be, not who I wanted them to be. And so after having children, I think Tanya shared, we had children when we were 24, 26, and 28. And then, understanding that process and going through that process, you learn a lot. You do a lot of things differently with your second child than you did with your first child. And then you definitely do a lot of things differently with that third child. And so, like I said, I worked a lot. I was a hard worker because I wanted to provide for my family. But also I had that entrepreneurial spirit. And so I'm a risk taker. Typically, I'm a calculated risk taker, but sometimes by nature, I'm going to just jump out there and see if it's going to work. And Tanya has this thing that she says that, hey, if we win together. And if we lose together. And so you want to definitely make sure that you're in the type of relationship or you're developing the relationship to whereas it's not where you made this mistake, so you caused us to be in this position, or you made this decision and now we're living on the high hog. But regardless of whoever makes the decision, that you guys are going to stick and stay with whatever the outcome may be, good, bad, or indifferent. And so through those processes, I learned a lot about myself. The first 10 years, I thought I was learning Tanya, but God was really showing me who I was. And so I encourage you to give yourself some grace. I encourage you to give your partner, your spouse, some grace, because you're going to need it. God has given both of you grace that we didn't deserve. And so it's only fair that you give your spouse or your significant other that same grace. And so after having children and starting our family, working real hard, being an entrepreneur, we decided that, hey, what are some goals and some plans that we have as a couple? And that's very important. A lot of times people get married because they love each other, but love, although it's important, love without a plan is a plan for destruction. And so I just want to encourage you to always sit down, talk things through, share your ideas, share your thoughts, help the other person understand where it is that you're coming from, and you be open to understanding where they're coming from as well. And so oftentimes we talk about what the problems are, but we never really talk about how to get through those problems. And so one of the things I want to encourage you with, and as we continue to go through these episodes, is that you have to have a made up mind that no matter what happens, you guys are one. It's amazing how God takes two people as individuals, bring them together, and then those two people become one. One in spirit, one in vision, one in goal, one with God in their union. And so communication is the key. You have to learn how to talk to one another and not talk at each other. You have to learn to forgive one another. You have to learn how to love one another. And I encourage each and every one of you, if you're in a relationship, if you really want your union to be what God created it to be and all that it's meant to be, look at Galatians 5:22 when it talks about the fruits of the Spirit. Read through that, and instead of putting what the fruits of the Spirit are, insert your name. Reggie is love. Reggie is kind. Reggie is peace. Reggie is long suffering. It's 9 fruits of the Spirit. And if you don't measure up to all 9 fruits of the Spirit, that means you have some work to do. And so this episode went a little bit longer than what we normally would have, just for our social media page. But I think it's important to share this information with you so that you can begin to encourage your spouse, begin to develop your relationship into all that God intended and created it to be. And so with that being said, with Tanya and I being here, I want you to remember to love like you mean it and date because you want to, because you're built for this.